Hello and welcome to Sceptic. I'm Kelsey De Almeida, stand-up comedian, Christian, and now podcaster. In this show, we'll be discussing all the interesting and sometimes slightly weird things people believe in. From religion and vegan diets to asking the big questions like, can we really contact the dead? Join me where in each episode I'll be chatting to an expert or a funny guest discussing a belief that's close to their heart. So, let's introduce today's guest. This week on the show, my guest is David the Medium. David is a full-time psychic medium with clientele all across the world. He not only speaks to the dead, but he can also predict the future. Well, you can imagine how excited I was to have him on the podcast, and the fact that he said yes to coming on must mean it's going to be a good episode, because he can predict. Anyway, we talk about what life is like as a medium, is it harder to date, are people wary of him, and what the afterlife is really like. We had such a good chat that there are actually 2 parts to this episode, so stay tuned at the end to hear all about part 2. So, relax into your seat and welcome David the Medium. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kelsey. So good to be here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. How are you in this lockdown? Because we're in the same city. We're both in Melbourne.
Yeah, we can't see each other, though. We can't come within 5 Ks of each other. So, I don't know. I think a lot of people in Melbourne would agree. It just kind of feels a bit like Groundhog Day at the moment. But no, otherwise I'm doing well. Like, I believe that every negative always has a positive at the end. So we'll see how we go.
Yeah, okay, good. Because I've started to forget about a different life. I watched a movie last night and they did a scene in a cafe and my instant response was, oh, they're so close. And then I was like, oh no, this is normal.
I was doing exactly the same thing. My gosh, I was watching this TV show and they had like a massive crowd leaving the football stadium. And I was like, they're so close. They're not wearing masks. Like, they're all going to die.
I know, it's so crazy. We've been so brainwashed. I started following you a little while ago on Instagram, and to be honest, mediums and psychic stuff it's something that's passed me by, and I've always been a bit like, I've never had the urge to go and see a psychic or a medium or really do too much research in it. It's something that I'm not really aware of. And then I started following you, and I've seen sort of your Instagram lives where you pick a random person, you do a reading, and I've just been glued to the screen. It's like watching live magic. I'm like, do something else. It's just mind-blowing. And in fact, I found on your Instagram you have a little section of people sort of that have sent you messages as way of proof that you're legit. And I just wanted to read a few of them because I think some of them are quite mad. This one woman messaged you and said, thank you so much for your reading the other day. You left me speechless, but there's definitely one thing I need to tell you about. Remember how you said my partner Matt was about to propose and I said there's absolutely no way? Well, he did that same evening. You're incredible. Now, I don't know where to begin with this because it's just such a new area for me and I just kind of want to know everything. How did it start? Is this something you were doing as a kid? Were you sort of bullying the teachers, going, I know all your secrets, so you want to give me an A instead of a B. How did it begin?
In hindsight, I wish that was the case. I might have ended up a bit better, but it's really interesting. Like, my pathway is probably very similar to yours, Kelsey. Like, even growing up, I never really believed in psychics. I didn't believe that it was a thing. I definitely believed that when our loved ones passed over that they did go somewhere, but I didn't believe that they sort of had the ability to hang around us. So I was 24 when I got told that I had this ability or this gift. And up until then, I'd never really felt, seen, heard anything at all. And it's been fascinating for me. It's definitely been a journey as well.
What happened when you were 24? Did you just start seeing or hearing spirits, or what happened?
No, I was still the complete opposite. So I just started a new job, actually. And my background is corporate legal. So I basically worked in legal my whole 20s. And I got recommended by a colleague who I'd only really known for about a week. So that's how I know that it was meant to be. And she recommended a medium. She said that I should go see her and, that if I'd ever done it before. And I was kind of the same as you. I was like, my whole life, it's always just kind of passed me by. Like, I never really given it much thought. If anything, I didn't really believe in it, like I said. So I went and saw this medium, like really skeptical, to be fair, like open-minded but skeptical. And the stuff that she was bringing up and the things that she was mentioning about me and my family, there was just no way that she could have known it. And then that kind of really altered something within me. And then at the very end, she was like, you realize you can do this as well. Like, you realize you've got the gift. And if anyone who knew me back then would know that I was like, honestly, the most obnoxious, opinionated bastard there probably was. So I was really like, there's no chance. Like, there's no way. Because, up until then, like, I'd never felt, I'd never heard or had really any sort of spiritual inclination at all. Like, I wasn't even raised religious, so I didn't even really have any like personal held views of the afterlife. And yeah, she ended up running a mentoring class with people that she believed that were a bit more sort of in tune. And yeah, really casual. Like, we used to go to her house on a weeknight and just sort of learn it, for want of a better word. Like, she used to sit down with us and teach us how to pick up on, signs and symbols, and really how to incorporate that into actually being able to read people.
Oh my god, it sounds like you went to Hogwarts.
It's basically is the outer version, the outer suburbs version of Hogwarts in Melbourne.
So does that mean there could be potentially hope for me?
110%. I believe every single person on this planet has the ability to do what I do, because at the end of the day, we are all souls, and, we're not humans having a spiritual experience. We're souls having a human experience. And I don't believe that there's anything special about me at all. I mean, I have this ability to what I call it is my gift. I don't doubt that at all. But there's nothing special that allows me to be able to do it. Every single person, I think, can definitely connect with having instinct, and they can have gut feelings, and that's really the beginnings of it. So once you're in the perfect environment and you're open to wanting to be able to do it, it does allow it to really sort of step forward, and it helps people to expand on it. And as I mentioned, every single person has this spiritual ability.
Has anyone come to see you as a client and they've turned out to have this sense as well that you've been able to mentor them?
Yeah, well, I have. Unfortunately, I'd love to do mentoring classes, but I haven't been able to do it yet. The universe keeps conspiring against me when I try. But I have sat down with multiple people, including one actually this morning. So perfect timing that you asked that question. I just get a vibe of people. I can sit down with them and instantly sort of feel that they may be a bit more in tune or have a bit more of a spiritual sense. So I have told people before that they can easily do what I do, and it sort of will come more naturally to them. And most of the time, they're already aware of it.
And so can we, because you describe yourself as a psychic medium, would that be fair?
Correct. Yeah.
And some people can be one or the other, basically. And is one sort of telling the future and one is sort of speaking to spirits? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So mediums have the ability to communicate with those that have crossed over and connected with the afterlife, and psychics are predominantly those who predict and foresee the future. So most mediums are psychics, but not all psychics are mediums. Just to add another layer of complication into it.
Totally. And would you say you're better at one than the other?
I'm more of a natural medium, yeah. At the very start, I didn't say that I was a psychic at all. I always said I'm just David the medium, which is where the name came from, obviously. But the more that I read and the more sort of practice and experience that I got, I realized that the natural psychic ability really started to expand and become, really incorporated itself in my readings.
And so I'm fascinated to know what sort of happens in people's readings. Like what's the process when someone walks into the room with you?
Yeah, so mostly people will come to me because the big part is that they are wanting to connect with someone who has crossed over, or multiple people that have crossed over. Because as I always say, I mean, every single one of us by this stage in our life knows someone that has crossed over, and we all miss them, or we have grief, or we have sadness around that. So predominantly it's that connection, but then they also want guidance within life. So they might want to know things about relationships, or work, or anything like that. So basically, I sit down with someone and I call it my zone. So I get into the zone. And that essentially is where I just get in a very comfortable, relaxed space, and I allow spirit to step forward. So it's a real sort of mindset shift. And voila, like, it just sort of honestly begins. I start feeling, I start seeing, I start hearing. My main thing is validation. So with any sort of energy that does step forward, I want to instantly be able to connect it to the person that I'm reading. Like, I want those people to know that, I'm bringing forth their grandmother, or their grandfather, or their
Yeah.
brother, or, their father. And then once the connection is made, I allow them to talk about anything and everything, and they will bring up anything and everything if it's a part of our life.
Have you ever had the wrong spirit walk in to the wrong person and go, "Oh, sorry, I've come back for the 4 o'clock appointment"?
No, well, it never happened, because basically the way that I want people to sort of imagine it, like, what we see of each other is the human, of course, but kind of around our head, there's kind of like this umbrella, or kind of like a force field of energy that kind of swirls around us. Like, that's how I kind of best describe it. And that energy is your loved ones. So wherever you go, they are going with you, and wherever I go, like, I can read it essentially. So when people sit down with me, they are only bringing forward their loved ones, their family, their friends, and things like that. Every now and then, I will sort of, before the reading starts, maybe like 5-10 minutes beforehand, I will come and maybe sometimes have spirits sit with me that do belong to the people that I'm about to read. But I never pick up on any sort of like lost souls, or anyone who's sort of coming a little bit early or anything like that.
Is that a bit awkward? Do you kind of go, could you come back in 10? Because I don't really know who you are.
Well, sometimes I sit down with them. I'm like, oh, I don't know who this is, but I imagine you're for the kind of like the next reading. So they won't tell me too much, but I'll feel them if that makes sense. Like I'll kind of feel an
That's
energy come
crazy.
and kind of sit with me, or and usually instantly I can tell whether it's male or female.
So you can't physically see them?
I can with my eyes closed, not all the time, but I can get a sense of them with my eyes closed as well. So I won't see them like I'm sort of seeing my friends or anyone like that with my naked eye.
I don't take this the wrong way, but I find this hilarious that there could be a spirit early for an appointment. So what would you talk about? What would you say? Like, is it just like casual small talk, or is it more existential than that?
No, it's not as exciting as it sounds. Usually, I'll just honestly feel their energy come into the room, and most of the 99 times out of 100, they will actually wait for their loved one to arrive before they even talk to me. So it's kind of like they're just like early for the job interview, so they're sort of sitting in my spiritual waiting room, waiting for their loved ones to arrive as well.
Because I imagine it's almost a bit awkward talking to you because you're their only bet to communicate to their loved ones, but they're telling quite personal stuff, and it's almost a bit like, would you mind not listening to this? Because
No, you make a really interesting point though, because spirit for me, like we are different to the soul. Like the human and the soul are two separate things. So I the way that I sort of describe it, we have to look at ourselves as like the body is the car, the human of what we see each other is the car, and the soul is the driver. So once the soul leaves the body, like it sort of takes on a whole new energy. Like the people that we remember are still the same as they were in the physical world. Like they still have their same memories, they still have their same personalities. They will sometimes look the same as well, but they take on a whole new life force where their whole purpose in life now becomes guidance and support and validation for us. So whilst the human element might be really nervous to talk about certain topics, the soul doesn't care. Like they'll go into everything.
and so if you said that they're sometimes they keep their bodies and stuff, or like what we remember they look like in the physical world, in the spirit world, are they a certain age? Can they, or are they the way they looked when they passed away, or are they at their peak?
Yeah, well, I always say the soul is ageless. Once we leave the body, it just becomes like a form of energy again. So technically, the soul doesn't really have an age, or it doesn't really have an appearance to it. But when they want to validate their presence for me and connect with their loved ones, they will appear as they will sort of have the same sort of characteristics. And 9 times out of 10, they will also come forward as the age that they were when they passed away. And if they were older, sometimes they will also give me glimpses of what they looked like when they were my age. So I'm early 30s. So sometimes I have grandparents come forward that will come forward as grandparents, like they look like a grey old lady or man. But then I'll sort of have glimpses of them of what they look like when they were 30, and that's usually what their kids remember, or pictures that their grandkids have seen of them as well.
The sort of clientele that come to you and mediums in general, they're wanting to connect with their loved ones, they want to know that they're okay, and also vice versa, the spirits want to. But obviously, as we know, not every family is perfect, and there's rifts in family. I've seen sort of clips of other mediums and stuff, and also from your things, it's always very encouraging from the spirit world. It's always like, we love you, and you're doing great, and we're proud of you. But have you ever had like an asshole that goes, do you know what, I always thought you were a bit of a bellend? Do you ever get any sort of that sort of resentment, kind of like, do you know what, now that I'm dead, I can finally tell you've been an arsehole my whole life?
To really sort of break it down, though, a lot of the negative sort of emotions that we hold are kind of driven by the human element of us. Like, sometimes our ego really gets in the way, or our pride really gets in the way. The soul isn't run by that. Like the soul, who our natural energy is, really comes from a real positive focus. Like they really do want to support and guide and everything like that. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen. Like, like I have had spirits come forward. Unsurprisingly, usually the ex-husband or the ex-wife. Even in spirit, they still like to kick the boot in. Or even sometimes, there's, as I say, the spirit will keep their same personalities, and sometimes they can be very difficult, sort of, argumentative people. And sometimes, parents more so than anything else can be always critical of us. So there is cases where I do read like children, and their parents will come forward and they'll still bag them out for their partner choices or their life choices, or their, even sometimes even their haircuts, like, real things like that. But overwhelmingly when spirit steps forward, it is with the aim of wanting to provide us with clarity and guidance and support. And because they really do come from it sounds really corny, but they really do come from love.
And when people sit down with you to have like a psychic session, I imagine you sort of book what you want? I want to book David the medium or David the psychic. Is that sort of a way it works?
I mean, when they book me, it's just sort of making an appointment in general. So they know, well, most of my clients know that they'll kind of get both involved. So it's really up to the spirit what they want to talk about. Some people do come in with wanting more of a focus on mediumship or wanting more of a focus on the future, and they maybe not be interested in the other one. With all my readings, it is a mixture of both, yeah.
Because I was wondering, what if you did look into someone's future and you saw that they murdered someone? Would you feel obligated to go to the police? Like, what is that situation?
Yeah, see, it's interesting. So I've never, well, I don't even know if it's possible to bring that up into the future, but I have actually brought forward spirits that have admitted to actually killing people before. Most of the time, the families already known or they had suspicions themselves. But when we reference the future, it always comes with an aim of support and guidance again. So spirit will never tell us to do anything if it changes how we would go about it or how we would actually change our sort of day-to-day life. They only want to provide guidance. It's not for them to make decisions for us. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like there is a circumstance that comes into my head or a previous reading where I did read a man who I won't mention names, of course, because but he did sort of his father basically admitted to him that his father knew that when he was younger that this man actually was involved in the murder of someone. And this man, he was an older guy now, like he was in his 50s when I read him, and he's like, well, yeah, no one knows that now. And then I was like, well, God, now should I worry for my safety? Like, is this guy going to come and kill me in my sleep now because I know his
Yeah.
secret? Yeah, so it's fascinating.
It's a tricky one as well to sort of go to the authorities and be like, look, I know who killed this guy. I have no evidence, but I know who did it. And they're like, oh, how do you know that? Oh, I'm a medium. And they're like, cool story.
Yeah, it's actually
you know?
right.
So that's quite a tricky question. It's a tricky situation. I
Yeah.
guess what that question was based on is how committed are you to client confidentiality?
No, 100%. Like I call myself like a doctor. Like I say this with every single person. Anything that we talk about stays between us, and that's just. I mean, not only is it moral for me, but it's what spirit deserves. It's what their loved ones deserve. And honestly, half the time, like because the messages don't come from me, I'll wake up the following morning and I'll literally forget everything I've said the day before. So even if I read people again, like I never remember anything about them anyway.
And so, because I've sort of watched a few of your sessions and stuff with people's loved ones that are there. They're sometimes very clear in what they want to say, full on sentences and stuff that the person can know, and then they suddenly turn extremely vague, and you're getting letters and images and stuff. Why do you sometimes see things or get things from the spirits that are so clear, and then other times it feels like you're, it must be horrible, like they're doing Pictionary with you because you're trying to guess what they want you to see. I remember one you
Yeah.
said you saw a picture of a horse, and it's because her parents they raised horses as kids, race horses. But why didn't the woman just go, "We raised race horses"? Why did that pop into your head? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. So with my readings, it is literally the whole thing is really a game of translation and sort of working out what spirit wants to say. Sometimes I will hear their actual voices, but overwhelming majority of the time they're using my internal voice or they're using my brain kind of like a library where they will bring in things for me. Now, most of the time when it is validation of mediumship where they're wanting to talk about themselves or they're wanting to talk about their families and things like that, it comes forward really clearly. When they want to do sort of more psychic things, they will never tell us directly because it's not, as I sort of mentioned before, it's not for them to make decisions for us. So they can be a bit more, not vague, but they are a bit more sort of open-ended or they're giving us a sort of a few different options. But I've always wondered that myself. Like sometimes with some spirits, you'll sit down with them for an hour, they will just speak so clearly and so openly and so concise. And then other spirits that you do connect with really can be a bit more sort of not guessy, but they are a bit more sort of vague or they're a bit more sort of quiet energies. And I think it really comes down to the personality of how they were in the physical world as well. Like usually spirits, when they were in the physical world, if they're really kind of not obnoxious, but if they're really loud and they're really outgoing and they never stop talking, they're going to be the same in spirit as well. And the messages always come forward a lot more clear that way as well.
So I had no idea. That's really interesting because I had no idea that. I assumed that it was their voice the whole time. I had no idea they were sort of in your head. So does that mean in the beginning when you were sort of starting out as a medium and stuff and you were testing out on people, because it's like in your head and your thoughts, when you were saying these things and sort of telling correct ideas about people's lives, you must have been going, holy shit, this is crazy.
Yeah.
That must have been an incredible feeling.
Yeah, it really is because when it's your own voice or especially when you're beginning out, and this is not even for me, like this is for everyone who's sort of spiritually inclined, like there is a lot of element of self-doubt because it's not something that we're aware of day to day before we do things like this. And, throughout pop culture and our own lives, we've been taught that it's something that is a bit taboo, or it's not real, or it can be a bit sort of scary, for want of a better word. But when I sit down with people and I'm sort of just hearing all these things, it is quite crazy that, I can hear these things in my head, or I can see these images, and it's so personal, and it really connects deeply with someone who I'm reading. Because the whole thing is just, even though I understand it, it's so inexplainable at the same time.
Yeah, so does that mean, can you differentiate your own thoughts to the thoughts of a spirit trying to communicate with you?
Yeah, 100%. Because when I get in my zone, I know that everything I see, feel, and hear isn't actually mine. And especially when I'm reading for people that I've never even met, like I literally know nothing about them, and then suddenly I'm getting really personal. Like I know that my brain's not, coming back to that. They get to the point where they really, it's not a possession, of course, but I really do allow them to use my body and use my brain and my thoughts to really communicate with their loved ones, to the point where if I even have like a minor cold, or if I have any physical ailments at that time, as soon as I start reading, it completely disappears. So I've woken up some mornings with terrible headaches and a real blocked nose and a sore throat, and as soon as I've sat down with someone, it just suddenly disappears instantly.
Wow.
So then I know that everything I feel comes to that person. Now, admittedly, in 2020, I wouldn't be sitting down with anyone with a sore throat, because then I'd be worried about killing them now. But like back in the day, it was a bit easier.
Because that was what I was going to ask. I was going to ask you, is it hard for you to like clock off, as it were? Can you relax? And I didn't know if there was an on off switch, because I was like wondering if you ever find yourself like offering a seat to an old lady on a train and you realize you're the only person that can see her. Do you know, like, does it ever play with you? Like, are you ever tired and you get into that zone accidentally and you start getting visions, or, people start coming into your life? Or is it as simple as, I can turn it off, I can turn it on?
For me, it's a very good on-off switch. Like it's again when I sort of get into the zone. So Spirit's very respectful as well. Like they, for want of a better word, they know when I'm working, like inverted commas working, and when I'm not. So they are very mindful of that. That being said, like if I do have maybe a few drinks, the barrier comes down maybe a bit easier than it normally would.
That must be a nightmare for your friends. They do something drunkenly to annoy you, and you're there going, your nan told you to, watch your mouth.
Put it this way, with all my friends, especially my longer term friends who knew me before I was a medium, I think for them, I owe them a lot of credit, because they really have put a lot of trust and faith into me to, not really read into them and read their personal lives. But
yeah, totally.
And that's the thing again, like even when I'm around people, like even I'm respectful. Like in all honesty, I probably could tune into them if I wanted, but there's always boundaries that are set. And with something that is so, special to me, and something that is so unique, I really have set my own boundaries and made them very clear, not only to myself, but also to the afterlife as well. So for any friends listening, I don't want you to think that I'm reading you when we're going out for dinner or drinks or anything.
Well, this is what I also want to know. It must be a nightmare to date a medium, because how can you, I'd be so paranoid. I mean, you must be amazing at speed dating. Their bum barely touches the chair and you're like, this isn't going to work out next. It must. What is that like? What are your dating experiences? Is it difficult? Do people have trust issues with you? Tell me about that.
I kind of feel like the old lady from the Titanic. It's been 84 years, Kelsey, so I don't know. No, well, it's interesting because I am single, so for anyone listening, hit me up. But like, I haven't been on any apps, for example, for a very long time, and as for anyone that doesn't know already, like I'm a gay man, so obviously dating in general society is a little bit more difficult, because you don't know who's gay for starters, but it's also harder to meet people. But even when for example, when I had Tinder, and I didn't put my occupation in it, because at that stage I was a little bit sort of not nervous, but kind of just didn't want to be judged. And I'd be talking to some guys on Tinder, and they'd be like, "Well, what do you do for work?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually a psychic medium." And I find it can go one of 10 ways. Bringing in homosexuality again. Okay, you tell people you're gay. Okay, they might not agree with it, but they understand what it is. So either they're like completely accepting, or they are judgy, or they don't care. Either way, it doesn't affect me. Other people's opinions of me are none of my business. But you tell people that you're a medium, and like I said, it goes one of 20 ways. They're fascinated. They think you're a fraud. They think it's fake. They think that you're weird. They think that you need mental help. So dating is difficult, because it is, I can understand for a lot of people that maybe aren't spiritually inclined themselves, it can be a really kind of interesting thing for someone to be like, "Oh, by the way, I speak to those who have died for a living." So it's been difficult to date, I guess. And a lot of guys always wonder. At the same time, it's also good to have Instagram, because people can message me on Instagram and they already know what I do for work. So it kind of cuts out the hard conversation.
I hadn't taken into consideration the sort of the dating apps and stuff, because one of the things that I sort of learnt from you was the fact that you didn't have to be in the same room as a medium for it to work, basically,
Yeah.
because you're doing this with random people from your Instagram lives, you pressed on their name, and then you were instantly connected to that person. So does that mean, can you sort of tell a lot more than the average person when using dating apps, for example? Can you tell if someone's a good person, got a good soul, or if someone's trouble? Can you just get that from a picture or a vibe?
It's something. It's really interesting to bring that up because it's been something I've been thinking about a lot about lately. Because I've really only just noticed myself that I can look at pictures and instantly tell what someone's like. And I thought it was sort of like my gut feeling, or whether it was more of a just, I don't know. Maybe some people look certain ways, but I've now really come to understand that it is again another sort of an expansion or an evolution within my own sort of spiritual psychic ability. As I mentioned, I mean, I haven't used dating apps lately, but like I can look at people and now sort of feel them and I understand what they're thinking sometimes. In terms of being able to read someone, I actually do need voice connection for that. So I do need to be able to hear them. So the good news is when I'm, messaging someone or if I'm chatting with anyone, I can't necessarily, bring forth their loved ones or have any psychic predictions for them. But I do get vibes through text at the same time as well. That's not to say that I completely don't feel anything at all. I can sort of read messages and sort of understand the vibes behind it or even the emotions that people feel when they send it.
And when you do the sort of Instagram lives and stuff, because it's so instant, you're literally talking to someone, you find out their name, and then you've got this wash of things that come towards you. How do the spirits know to communicate to you in that moment instantly? It's like they're sort of just sitting around waiting for it because it happens so quickly. Like,
Yeah.
can you explain that? Was this just, that just a bit of an anomaly?
Well, the way that I explain it, once we cross over, we all do enter sort of what I call the collective conscious. So it's kind of, you've got to imagine like all these little spirits kind of floating up in the sky above us. That's kind of the real easy way to sort of describe it. So they're watching over their loved ones and they know that their loved one's gone on Instagram and they're waiting to be read by me. So they kind of can watch it all. And then once I've got the voice connection with someone, they have the ability to come to me and also their loved one at the same time because spiritual energies can be in more than one place at once. So they can sit with their loved ones. They can also sit with me. And it's sort of like just the wonders of modern technology for them.
And so what are the spirits doing when they're not with you? Have you ever sort of asked that or wondered, or do you know? Like, because here's the thing, I'm religious and I believe in heaven and hell, and I do believe there's an afterlife and all of that. But
Yeah.
the thing that sort of confuses me, what is the afterlife to you? Is it heaven? Is it like a heavenly state? Or it kind of feels like limbo. People talk about limbo when they can't get to heaven. And that's where you get sort of haunting and stuff, is that they have a sort of troubled past and they stay on earth to try and fix old
Yeah.
problems. But where are they in the afterlife?
Well, I say myself, and I think this is a really interesting question because I know a lot of people have so many different opinions and their own sort of viewpoints on it. And I think until we cross over ourselves, we're never really going to know for sure. But in my sort of experience and in my opinion, I say that where we go after we leave Earth is not the final resting spot. I kind of call it my waiting room. It's like a spiritual waiting room, but it does take on the same aspects of how we would translate heaven to be. It's incredibly peaceful. Everyone is together. Everyone's happy. Everyone's healthy, and everyone, for want of a better phrase, is at peace. But I do believe that that's not also the final resting spot as well. Some souls have to come back to Earth because there's still lessons that they need to experience or they need to learn, or there's just things that they need to gain again. The phrase or the analogy that I use is I call Earth as classroom for the soul, because we have to come here to learn things, and different life lessons are kind of like different subjects at school. I do believe though, and again, I haven't been able to prove this for want of a better phrase, but eventually when the soul has learned everything that it needs to, it does go to what I believe to be the final resting spot, which I would call heaven. And even though I'm not necessarily religious, I still believe in a heaven and kind of like a hell as well, I guess. The version of hell for me isn't kind of eternal torment or punishment. It's kind of more, I mean, that's the thing, you kind of got me thinking on the spot now, because I'm like, how do I translate hell?
Yeah, I know.
It's interesting. I don't believe that souls really go to hell as we imagine it. It can kind of be like a space where maybe the energy just sort of, for want of a better phrase, disappears, and maybe the soul does cease to exist in that point.
And so when you're saying that, once it's finally rested and, at peace with everything, does that mean once it does move on to that next stage that you can no longer communicate with them? If someone came to you and said, I want to speak to my grandmother, but she's moved on, does that mean that she's no longer available, basically?
Oh, no, the souls, our spirit families always stay as groups, if that makes sense. So even, our grandparents, our parents will always wait for us to return to them. So very rarely do I pick up on like great, great, great grandparents grandparents, of course, because they have moved on. But yeah, you've got to imagine kind of like family groups. So yeah, the grandparents will always stay for their kids, and they'll stay for their grandkids and their great grandkids and things like that. Yeah, even if you lost a grandmother or a grandfather, for example, even before you were born, they're still up in the waiting room waiting for you to join them. So they'll never move on without us. We always do it in family groups.
Yeah, it's very encouraging to sort of know that your family are still there looking out for you no matter what.
Yeah, they'll never move on without us.
But what's interesting is you mentioned that you're not religious. Now, that blows my mind in some senses because I am religious. And one of the things that, I get atheists coming up to me after shows and stuff, and they're looking for an argument with me. And one of the things that comes up all the time is, which I imagine might be the same with you, in that kind of sort of, like you mentioned before, people calling you fake or, skeptics and stuff, is I get a lot of well, where's the proof? Show me some proof and I'll believe in God. But you could argue that you've seen proof. You've seen an afterlife. You've seen people who are no longer with us being able to communicate to us in a different world. So what is it that makes you not religious in that sense?
Well, that's the thing. I'm spiritual. I find religion, it's honestly, it kind of is the same thing in a lot of ways anyway, because a lot of religious viewpoints and a lot of spiritual viewpoints, they do share the same tenets. But for me, it's kind of like, Muslims will box themselves into the books of being Muslims, or Catholics will be Catholics, or Hindus will be Hindus. Whereas they all share the same symbolisms and the same sort of religious tenets as spirituality as the whole. So I am spiritual, but I'm not religious.
Wow, how interesting.
Because not that it's the bigger picture, but to me, it's kind of like the bigger picture because I'm kind of including everything. Now, the interesting thing about the waiting room, though, is that irregardless of what religion you consider yourself in the physical world, they are all still in the same spot afterwards. So Muslims will be sitting there with Christians, and Christians will be sitting there with Jews, and the atheists will still be up there as well, and people that are agnostic or maybe consider themselves spiritual, for want of a better word again, are all in the same spot again.
So you've basically blown the lid on all of the world's religion in one sentence. Just gone, guys, you're all going to end up in the same place. Just stop worrying about it.
Well, to be very blunt, and I will never take away from someone's religious belief, because it's not even just the belief that they have, but it's the values that help guide them, which is the most crucial, important thing to me. But I have read Hindus that do expect their loved ones to have been reincarnated.
Right.
And when I bring them forward and they're like, oh, they're still there, I'm like, yeah, they're still here. Like, they're waiting for you. And, as I mentioned, the final waiting room is not the final spot. The waiting room that we go to after we leave Earth is not the final spot. So there's nothing to suggest that the final spot still doesn't tie in with everyone's personal religious beliefs. But for me, it's sort of like I'm just looking at sort of the bigger picture about including everything involved. Because even before religion was created, people were still dying. People were still crossing over. They had to go somewhere. That's the way that I look at it as well. Like, a lot of the modern religions may only be a few thousand years old, but humans have been dying longer than that.
When you hear these stories of people that have near-death experiences and they see sort of the stairs to heaven, or they see Jesus, or they see a higher power of some sort, is there any inkling of a higher power that you've been able to either communicate to, or that the spirit world has referenced? Has anyone sort of come forward and gone, there is a God? Or maybe you can't talk to them, but they've gone, we can confirm there is a God, there is a creator out there.
Yeah, 100%. They don't really use the term God, for want of a better word, but they definitely do reference a higher power or higher creator. And, as I mentioned, even though I don't consider myself religious, I have done meditations where I have connected with Archangel Michael, for example.
Oh, right.
And I didn't even know who he was. Like,
Yeah.
So, taking on the premises of some forms of Christianity, for example, I definitely believe that there are angels and guides and, saints that do watch over.
Is your spiritual connection limited to whoever's in front of you? Or could you sit one day and go, do you know what? I want to chat to Elvis or Hitler. Like, can you pick and choose who you want to speak to?
I would love to speak to them, but it really depends if they want to speak to me. But that being said, even though we may be celebrities or infamous in the physical world, in the afterlife, again, they are just spirits. Like I have, one of my best friends, Simone, her auntie was a massive Elvis fan, and her auntie did reference getting to hang out with Elvis in the afterlife. So they may be celebrities or a certain fame or infamy in the physical world, but in the afterlife, they are just souls, the same as you and I. So they do have the ability to hang out.
But surely Hitler's got to be in the corner on his own somewhere on the clouds. He's not got any mates up there.
Well, see, that's the thing. It goes without saying that, what Hitler did was completely indefensible, and no one would ever look at it and be like, well, obviously he had a positive impact. Like he's obviously, his form on Earth was a very evil, negative presence that had a drastically negative impact on the planet. But that was his lesson this time around. And I inherently believe that the soul is not evil. The soul for itself is a real pure form of love and energy, for want of a better phrase to use. So, like I said, I'll never defend anything that Hitler said or done, but his soul is not necessarily that person.
So you're saying that basically all is forgiven in the afterlife?
The afterlife looks at the world kind of like the bigger picture. The afterlife is the bigger picture. So the way that Spirit sort of describes it sometimes as well, which is a good analogy as well, they do look at their life like a book, and suddenly it has the beginning and the end and all the themes and all the characters and everything in between. And that was their journey this time around. But the book is sort of teaching them the lessons about what they needed to learn in that experience. But, if you do believe in past lives, like we've technically been here maybe 10, 20, 30 times before. And each one of those lives is very different to each other. So it sounds so crazy talking about this, but like in every time that Hitler may have come back, it's not as though he's caused mass genocide and mass murder every single life that he's had.
Right. Wow.
That's really deep. Like even I'm trying to think about
I
this.
know. Yeah. Well, I didn't think I'd be asking these sort of questions. I didn't have a Hitler bullet
No,
point.
I'm loving it. I kind of feel like I should have thought more about it. No.
I would, love to go and sort of speak to him and just go and ask why he did what he did. What was it in him that was so evil and so angry? But if you're saying that in the afterlife, your soul is different and forgiven and pure, it's almost like it'd be a waste of time, because you're saying that sort of essence isn't evil anymore, or somehow manifested on earth
Yeah.
as an evil person, but the spiritual world, everyone is
Yeah.
equal.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, technically, it is still a part of his overall soul, because the lessons that Hitler had this time around definitely taught him a lot, whether negative or positive. So it has become a part of him. But it's kind of like that's only one part of him. That the whole soul isn't defined by that one moment in the physical world.
Right.
So, and not like I said, not that that's any defense. And I think even the way that we reference afterlife is kind of like the bigger picture, and everyone's stories are important and they definitely have an impact. But even Hitler's actions had a lot of positive and negative impacts on the rest of the world at the same time as well. Like Hitler's story did become everyone else's story at that time as well. Unfortunately, it was a devastating story for literally tens of millions of people, because it either brought misery on their lives or it brought their death. It was their cause of their demise in the physical world. But at the same time, that is their story. There's no soul in spirit in the afterlife that's looking down and being like, "Fuck, I can't believe that happened. Like this is bullshit." They understand the purpose behind it, why it happened, because it's what it taught them, or it's the impact that it had on those around them. That's really quite deep.
Does that mean you believe that when you do pass on from earth into spirit, that it's always at the right time?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a bit of a theory that before we come to earth, we have what we call the life contract.
Mm-hmm.
And that is stored in what they call the Akashic records, which is just a spiritual term. But essentially, before we are conceived into the natural world or into the physical world, we are having what we call a life contract. And it says, this is who you are. This is what you're going to do. These are the lessons that you learn. This is the impact that you have. And essentially, our soul, for want of a better phrase, signs off on that. We sign off at the dotted line down the bottom, and then we're conceived into that life. So the soul knows the key elements of why it's here and what it has to learn and what it has to experience. The human side of us doesn't, because that would be kind of like cheating on an exam, because we have to live it and we have to, do it day to day. But the soul is the driver, and the soul knows why it's here. So in the afterlife, the way that I'll word it, even before those unfortunate people that were killed by Hitler, they would have known that was their outcome before they even were born into that life. Maybe, a 12-year-old girl she would have signed off on her contract, and she's like, okay, I'll be born in Amsterdam in 1930, and in 1942 I will be, killed in war. And her soul would have known that, and her family's souls would have known that was going to happen to her. But in that process, her soul has learned so much in those 12 years. And I always say myself, we learn so much more in negative times than we do in happiness, because, anger and frustration is such a soul lesson that, it helps propel us into understanding life in completely different areas. So for a 12-year-old girl to die in war, she will know more about life than I do at 33.
But is that her? I just got a meow from your cat.
No, I was like, my cat.
Is that? Don't tell me that's some sort of message from the spirit world going, get off this top. This is supposed to be light-hearted, Kelsey.
The cat really brought in some comic humor there.
I know. I mean, yeah. If there's ever a time to say the phrase "there is a God," now is that time.
Yeah.
We've gone much deeper than I thought we were going to get.
I know. I was like, Jesus.
I know.
I love it.
So I'm just trying to wrap my head around this in the sense that you're kind of briefed before you come onto the earth. So in that case, how does your soul have this memory or this understanding before you go on earth? This is what you're going to do, and then suddenly it's wiped when you sort of are brought into the world. And then does it come back? And then is that your only go? Like, this is your fate. You land on earth and then you live your life, and then when you die, you're back as a soul. And is that it after that? Would you get another go?
Yeah, you can definitely come back again because there'll be different lessons to learn. So the way that I describe it, we have to look at our life on Earth as kind of like a computer game. Like we start off at the very start and we're brand new, and we have a certain path that we have to follow to get to the end. And along the way, we're doing different challenges and we're leveling up. But there is only certain paths we can go down. Like we can't deviate from the mission of the game. And eventually, you get to the very end, and it's game over. And game over for us is crossing over. And upon reflection, like you'll look over the game and you'll be like, okay, I've learned this, I've learned this, I've learned this, or I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that different, but I'll learn this. So different experiences will give the soul different lessons. And, we may get to the afterlife and be like, okay, maybe I need to, learn relationships again, or maybe I need to expand on my experiences with business, just to throw a few sort of different topics out there. And the soul will be born back into the physical world to, again, take the journey.
But I thought you said that there are like Hindus and people like that believe in reincarnation and their family haven't been reincarnated.
Yeah, but they expect them to be reincarnated as soon as they cross over most of the time.
Oh, right. So there's a process.
Yeah, so there's kind of like the process. So again, it's all about the family groups and the family circles, or what I call the soul families. So not all the time, of course, because but there is some spiritual belief, or people that I read that may be religious that expect something to happen to their loved ones. Like another good one to use is Greek Orthodoxy, for example, or the Orthodox religion. A lot of the older generation are under the belief that if their loved one commits suicide, that they can be sent to hell. And for me to be able to connect them with their loved ones that maybe did take their own life, and to know that they are still peaceful and happy, that's a lesson that their loved one wants them to know. But it's, again, sort of changing their belief in what they expected to happen.
Okay, to sort of move on to a bit more about you and psychic abilities. Can you predict things that are going to happen in your own life?
No, and I bloody wish I could. So for me, it goes down to the same thing. Like, I'm not meant to know what happens next. Like, I can definitely get vibes on things, and I can definitely have an instinct about how I believe that things will go. But I can't connect with my loved ones the same that I can connect with yours, for example. So I can definitely feel them around, but I can't speak to them. I can't hear them. I can't get signs from them that are so blatant as much as maybe some other people. And the way that I translate that is because, for example, if my mother passed over, I would want to spend 24/7 in my head with her. And that's not my journey this time around. Like, that's not my purpose. So unfortunately, when it comes to my own life, I mean, they can give me guidance, and I get a lot of sort of gut feelings and a lot of sort of instinctual ability, but I don't know for sure and I don't think any of us know for sure. I don't think any psychic's meant to know what happens next because, again, we're not learning what we're meant to be learning if we know the outcome of it already.
I think I've already sort of asked you this, but do you ever sort of have spirits of other people that are maybe lonely in the afterlife and sort of know that they can communicate to you with a strong connection, and that really sort of seek out to sort of speak to you about stuff?
No, because I don't believe loneliness exists in the afterlife. Loneliness is such a human emotion because it helps teach us certain things or helps us feel different ways. But the soul is beyond that, or it's above that. And either way, every single soul family does have connections in the afterlife themselves. Like, I think every single person has family, obviously, and their families will be in the afterlife with them anyway. So spirit doesn't get lonely, for want of a better word.
But do you ever get the situation where maybe, for example, someone doesn't believe in mediums or psychics and thinks it's all rubbish, but the spirit desperately wants to communicate to that person? Do you ever get it the other way around, where the spirit comes to you first and tries to get you to hunt for their relative?
Yeah, no. Some mediums have talked about that, but I've never had it personally, no.
Okay.
And I think because, again, my on-off switch is pretty strong. So even if they wanted to come to me, they know that it's sort of like, business hours only.
Right. And with the whole sort of predicting elements of the future and stuff, the thing I struggle with isn't it a bit like the butterfly effect? If you tell someone, I mean, I'll think of an extreme example. If you tell someone you're going to get run over next Tuesday, that person will think, well, I just won't go out next Tuesday, and does that sort of
Yeah.
create problems in terms of your legitimacy? And that in that case, it's like, well, you're in this sort of weird cycle where you've prevented something from happening, but in that case, shouldn't you have predicted that you were going to prevent it from happening? And that, so you sort of said that you won't get run over. Do you know what I mean? Like there's this weird
Yeah,
cycle.
totally. Yeah, I mean, spirit will never tell us anything if it changes how we would go about it or how we would think about it. So even if you were going to get hit by a car next Tuesday, which by the way, Kelsey, I think you're fine. I don't feel it anyway, but like they wouldn't tell you
Right.
because okay, yes, it is a horrible situation, but it's also what you had to go through because that's part of your soul journey. So if that caused you irreparable injury or if it actually caused you to cross over, well, it wasn't meant to have been stopped. So spirit, even though they are our loved ones, they are more sort of, they do look at life kind of like the bigger picture again. So with psychic predictions, I make general ones about the universe and about the world and, current events and pop culture. That's because as I'm making it, it's not going to change the outcome. That's just me sort of tapping into the energy behind it. But at a personal level for people, yeah, spirit will never tell us anything if it changes how we would think about it or how we would go about it. So, for an example, they can give predictions that sort of like, okay, you're looking for work. Well, there's going to be a lot of opportunity arise in March next year. You might get a phone call about this certain job or things like that. But that's already in line with sometimes how people are thinking or the processes that they're taking. Like a good example that I had was a contestant on Married at First Sight, the TV show that I read before she was actually on TV. And I said to her, I was like, do you actually want to be on TV? She goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And she's like, I've just applied for a TV show. And I was like, well, you're actually going to be on Married at First Sight. And lo and behold, she got on Married at First Sight.
Oh wow.
So she'd already put the energy out into the universe to, show that she wanted to be on, and she'd already done her application. I just gave her the answer, but everything at that stage was already out of her control anyway, because she'd already set the ball in motion.
Yeah. So what you're almost suggesting is that we almost don't have any free will, and it's almost connecting the religious sort of community in the terms of we all have a plan, that there's this greater
Yeah.
idea for all of us, that our life has already been mapped out and we're just sort of pawns in the game, because we like to think that we
Yeah.
are all in control. I think especially these days with technology and stuff, we like to feel like we know everything, we can make our own decisions. But with that the thing of, the spirit's not warning you about stuff, it seems to be that if I was meant to die next Tuesday, that's going to happen. And now I can't do anything to stop that. And that's already been written on my journey.
Yeah. So the way that I translate it is that because life is classroom for the soul, we have to come here and learn certain things. There's key points and key features and key themes in our lives that no matter what we do, we cannot avoid, because that is the whole reason we're here. So the way that I describe it though, like I kind of want everyone listening to kind of imagine like an equilateral triangle, like just a big triangle in front of your face. And the key points of the things that we cannot avoid is the pinnacle of that triangle, like the point at the very top. Now, at that point, even though there's still things that we can't change or things that we have no control over, we still do have free will, and we still do have control over our day-to-day actions and small little themes. It's the key points that we can't change. But what we do have free will over is the path that we can take to those points. So in using the triangle analogy, you have to imagine all the different pathways, like they can be tens, there can be dozens, there can be hundreds, all down the very bottom, and they go from left to right. And whatever path you take, will all still end up at that same pinnacle point at the very top of the triangle, but you've got a lot of choice. So that's where free will comes in still. So every single little thing of our life isn't pre-written. Like day to day, we still have a lot of our own decisions that we have control over and a lot of our own free will and our free thoughts. But there is key points that those will all tie into that we are inevitable or that we can't avoid. And that's the soul journey.
I suppose that's quite nice to know that wherever you end up, it was almost, I mean, it's like that old phrase, it was meant to be. So, I guess meeting your partner or getting that job, and because I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. I suppose you are too, because you think it's
100%.
everything is, because there must be, I've definitely experienced this, and I'm sure you have too, moments in your life when you go, I can't believe how that worked out.
Yeah.
That's where I sort of get the religious part of me goes, well, that was a higher power telling me to do that. And in the same way, you'd imagine that's the spirit world. In that sort of sense, would you imagine that's your family encouraging it, or is it the universe? Because it sort of feels like the universe is a broader term.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing in the way that I describe it, your higher power and my higher power is the same power. It's just obviously how we interpret it that maybe it sort of differentiates a little bit differently. I believe it's, little things like that where it's just one little event that ends up changing your whole life. It was essentially pre-written anyway, but again, it sort of had the little aspects of the paths that we take to it. But, definitely everything has a plan. And I've already forgotten, was there another part of that question? I've gone off on the tangent in my head and I got it silent.
And I suppose I can't do a podcast with you when I'm in the same city as you, but I am legally not allowed to sit in front of you because I'd be arrested and not ask you, what are your thoughts on the coronavirus? Do you have any sort of insights that you can give me and the listeners, any sort of things that you predict are going to happen, or is there sort of nothing to do with the coronavirus going on with you?
Oh gosh, I mean, the coronavirus is such an interesting thing to be happening. So basically, towards the end of last year, and a lot of spiritual people in general, like not even towards the end of last year, but even over the last few years, we could all feel that there was a big change coming. And I had a lot of conversations with some spiritual friends, especially in the second half of last year, about how we sort of view 2020, and it was always going to be the year of the awakening, for want of a better word to use. And we all knew that there was going to be a very big shift that was going to sort of envelop the whole world. And lo and behold, it's become the coronavirus. Now, I did not see it as being a pandemic. I actually had no idea where it would be, even though I could feel it and I knew it was coming. I didn't know in what form it was going to take. But now the world has been changed. And that was because of the coronavirus. And I've split it into three different phases. It's what I call my phase one, my phase two, and my phase three. And phase one was wanting the world to hibernate and do a lot of self reflection. And that was the before and after shift. And that was really from December 2019 to June this year. And lo and behold, that was the coronavirus, because that fits perfectly into that and everything that it's done to the world. Like, the whole world literally went into lockdown. So that was a perfect form of hibernation for us. But now I look at the coronavirus and it's kind of like, okay, it's had its path and it's done what it's needed to do. But for one of a, and I'll probably get in so much trouble for saying this, but it is now being exploited. And other people, whether they're governments or whether they're celebrities or whether they're just general people in the populace, they are exploiting it to their own advantage now, because the coronavirus has done its change. And I will never take away from the seriousness of it. Like, I think, you'd have to be silly to say that it's not dangerous. Like, I mean, this is a virus. The virus does exist. The virus is killing people. But it's like the pendulum swung the other way now, and it's now been used as a form of control. That's how I kind of view it. I'm going to get so much flat back from that.
It's such a shame that you didn't foresee it being a pandemic rather than just a shift, because I imagined you were in the supermarkets in December buying 40 packs of toilet paper with everyone going, who the heck is that weirdo?
No, that was me in January, actually. I actually literally did do that. So, like I said, we could all feel that there was a change coming. And then what I did, I kept doing meditations on it, because I'd be sitting on the couch in like early January. I suddenly hear like coronavirus in my head. And at that stage, it wasn't really making news. Like, it wasn't a big deal. So I meditated on it, and I did see empty shelves, and I saw people walking around in masks, and I saw body bags everywhere that were empty. And that's how I was like, oh God, this is actually going to be something big. So I actually, like, I've got like text messages that I've sent to people at the start of February, and I was like, just go and buy food. Like, don't go crazy, but the
Really?
stalls are going to be empty. Yeah,
Wow.
I've still got some leftover food in my pantry at the moment from what I bought in
Oh,
February.
right. Oh my God. For about the first, I mean, I thought this was going to be over in sort of a couple months, but when it all happened and we panicked, bought everything, I swear to God, for about 12 weeks, I think I had tuna with every single meal that I had, even stuff it didn't go with. I was having beef and tuna because I'd bought so much canned food. It was ridiculous. Like, I'm sure I've got some sort of poisoning going on, but
No, well, that's the thing. I thought it would be over quickly as well, because phase one was meant to finish in June. The coronavirus shouldn't have really lasted beyond June. So even when I was like, knew that there was a massive shift that was coming, once it begun, I was like, oh, this will be over in June. And the funny thing, it actually was over in June, because for the most part, the whole world at the start of June went back to normal.
And do you have any predictions of when this will end, or when, like, a lot of people on Instagram were messaging both of us when we put out questions saying, when is travel going to start off? Do you have any sort of inklings of when we're going to be back to normality, or things are going to start opening up, or when I can work again?
Yeah, when you can actually do your craft again. Yeah, exactly. So for me, even at the very start when I was making predictions on the coronavirus, I always said that domestic travel would be out for the rest of the year, but sort of start coming back towards spring and summer in Australia. And now that we're in spring, that's sort of been a bit more obvious, because states are opening up their borders to each other. Unfortunately, Melbourne's going to be the very last place that's going to be allowed to visit the rest of Australia. But international travel for me was always going to be around February, March, April next year. Even this year, when everything started to get a bit serious back in February, March, April, I was still saying this will kind of go on for a while. So I believe that really towards the end of this year, there will be a massive switch where everyone's like, well, this isn't necessarily going anywhere, so we have to learn to live with it. There will be definitely a lot of talk about vaccines and things like that. I know the United States even with Donald Trump, everything that he's gone through in the past week, they're really looking at using that as a method to manufacture vaccines and sort of certain medicines that they know now work. So really, once we start moving into 2021 is still a bit of a chaotic year. Like, it's not by no means, back to normal. But chaos doesn't have to be negative. It just has to be constant change and a bit of instability, which will sort of be the dominant theme of 2021 as well. But life should, and really stress the part should, should return to a sense of normality really around from March onwards next year. But it really depends on whether that's the case.
And are you talking Australia specifically or worldwide?
Yeah, worldwide.
How crazy to be thinking about this. And it must be so frustrating for you to sort of, because you have these sort of abilities to not be able to predict like a clear answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just not meant to know. It's part of my journey as well. Like, I'm still in the world and I'm still living it day to day as well. I can definitely get senses and I can definitely see directions and I can definitely feel energies and vibes and motivations behind everything. But at the end of the day, I'm not meant to know what happens either. Not completely.
And who's deciding that?
Hashtag the universe. I don't. I think it's, again, because it's all part of our life journey and we're just not necessarily meant to know how it goes scene by scene until the end of the movie. Everything we can't necessarily know what comes next, because then it's kind of like we're getting kind of like the cheat sheet to an exam.
Yeah.
We're finding out the answers before we actually go through it.
So that was David the Medium. Now if you're thinking, man, I could have listened to so much more of that, well, you're in luck, because there's a part 2 to this episode coming your way. In part 2, we talk about whether mediums help aid the police in their investigations, and I get a live reading, which I've kept in the show, where we talk to my relatives that have passed over. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode as soon as it comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to get first notice of future guests and the chance to send in your questions before the next recording. Just search for Kelsey De Almeida on those sites. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by becoming a Patreon member by going to patreon.com/anti-skeptic, where you can send me a monthly donation to help support the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.